So the month of November is an opportunity for us to show our appreciation for Canada's veterans and to reflect on the sacrifices they've made. Coming up tomorrow, November 8th, is National Indigenous Veterans Day. And here to discuss more is Robin Cody of the Saskatchewan First Nations Veterans Association. She was recently named president of the association's South Branch. So good morning and thank you for joining us.
Good morning. I'm so glad to be here today.
Yeah, happy to have you, Robin. Tomorrow, November 8th, of course, big day, National Indigenous Veterans Day. I wanted to first, before we dig into that, tell us a little bit more about what the association does and just a little bit more about the association.
So the association is very important because it was initially developed to fight for the rights of Indigenous veterans in Canada. And we can't really fully understand why the association was developed until we understand, the Indian Act of 1876 and what enfranchisement to First Nations people across Canada. And, along with that, when we talk about enfranchisement, what that meant was that if a status Native woman was married to a non-Indigenous person, she would lose her Indigenous status. As well as if you wanted to go out and receive education like university, you were also enfranchised and forced to give up your Indigenous ancestry or your rights as a First Nations person, as well as if you joined the military and you were away from your reservation for a period of time. What happened was a lot of the World War I, World War II, and Korean veterans came back and they weren't allowed to go back to their First Nations. And then some of them actually lost their First Nation status.
Yeah, and you've got a military background as well. I wanted to get back to those points that you just made. That was being in one of my follow-up questions, but you've got a military background. I wanted you to kind of explain what National Indigenous Veterans Day means to you and what kind of impact it's had on your life.
So when I think about National, Aboriginal Veterans Day, I think of the service of my grandfathers and what they had to experience when they came back from the wars and what their sacrifice meant. Because if you look at First Nations people in a global context, you're not going to go to another country and you're not going to see large ethnic groups of First Nations people in other countries. Like, this is our home. This is our homeland. So when I think about it, I think about my forefathers, my grandfathers, and how they foresaw the country and how important they felt it was to be able to, sacrifice their life and to hold up the structures that, protect us today in our countries.
Yeah, and so, and I want to go off of your earlier points. Now, there's some people that probably wonder why we just don't have everything umbrellaed under, November 11th, Remembrance Day. But, it does raise the point. Are we doing enough as a province, even as a country, for Indigenous veterans? Are we doing enough?
I personally don't think that we are doing enough. I think this is a start. We have this day to recognize our Indigenous veterans and their sacrifice for the country and for people like myself as an Indigenous woman who's college educated, and I'm also a veteran. So when you think about the times like in the early 1800s up until the 1960s, my status would have been erased. I would have technically not been able to say like I'm a status Indigenous person of Canada. So when I think about that, I'm completely honored for the sacrifice of my grandfathers and those who made that ultimate sacrifice. And I think moving forward, Canada really needs to, or I shouldn't say Canada, but there are citizens that really need to understand what the Indian Act means and what it has done to our people across the nation.
Absolutely. Well, as you put very well, great opportunity for us to reflect on veterans and what they've been able to do for us here in this country. So with that, Robin, that's all the time we have, unfortunately. But I wanted to say thank you so much for joining us on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me.